The Silly Goose Gang Podcast.
Okay, so we are back with episode 66 of the Silly Goose Gang podcast, and we're genuinely delighted to be joined today by Bob Hamer, who spent 26 years as an FBI special agent and also a United States Marine Corps veteran. So, Bob, thank you very much for taking the time to join us this afternoon or this evening, our time.
Hey, thanks for having me. My wife is disappointed that this wasn't live and you weren't going to fly me over to do this in studio, but
next
such
time
it is.
Next time, if you and the wife are ever in Scotland, yeah, absolutely. Let's do something. That'd be cool. Yeah, we actually have a list of people from the podcast, Americans who are all promising to say hello to us if they come over. So that might be quite hilarious. But yeah, it's been an interesting life that you've led to this point, Bob. So yeah, what's your actual background? Where does the journey to this roller coaster begin?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I don't talk about this too much, but I actually went to law school. So I was a lawyer, had been in the Marine Corps for 4 years as a judge advocate. So that was a lawyer in the Marine Corps. We used to laugh that when you were a lawyer in the Marine Corps, you began as a defense counsel. And then when you got good enough, they made you a prosecutor. So I had about 150 trials, everything from unauthorized absence to murder. But it wasn't very exciting. I grew up in a TV generation, and I just thought all the courtrooms were Perry Mason, all the legal shows that you see, that it was that exciting. And the courtroom really held no excitement at all for me. Every single case came down to, is the search legal? Was the confession done in a proper way? It was all procedural issues, and they were never whodunits. And I was just looking for something more exciting. Literally tried to get into the CIA, thought everything was going well, and then scored a 0 on a personality test that they gave me. When they scored from 0 to 10, and I scored a 10. I scored a 0. And but the FBI, back then, the FBI really liked lawyers and accountants. And because I had my law degree, I was able to get into the FBI. And it really was, as you said, Chris, it was a roller coaster ride. 26 years. I can honestly say I had bad days. I had very bad days, but I never had a day that I thought, oh, why did I take this job? Why didn't I listen to my grandmother and go work in a manufacturing plant somewhere? But it was great. I spent much of my career undercover. So my wife and I have been married 47 years, and I say she's the same sweet girl that I married, but I've been like a dozen different personalities. So how cool is that? She's been involved in multiple marriages. She's been married to a contract killer and a residential burglar and a white collar criminal, an international arms dealer, a pedophile. It just gets interesting.
I hope she doesn't tell her friends this.
There were times sometimes she'd go, I don't like you playing this contract killer. And I said, God, I'm going to be a pedophile next week, for crying out loud. Give me a break.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's.
Of course, you pronounce it pedophile, don't you?
Pedophile, yeah. Yeah, that's something that we. Oh man, I don't think there's enough hatred in the world for those kind of assholes. But yeah, it's. How do you deal just with knowing that that's what you're going into? How do you approach that?
It's funny, Chris. It really was my most difficult undercover assignment, and it wasn't from a danger standpoint. I've been shot at. I've shot people. Been in fights, that type of thing. But this was when I infiltrated the group, and it's called NAMBLA. It's the North American Man Boy Love Association. It was a group of men who were sexually attracted to boys. When I got involved in that, it was a completely different mindset. So if someone is trying to hire me to be thinking I'm a contract killer, they really don't care whether I like cricket or the ballet. They want to know whether they believe I'm capable of killing the person they want killed. So it never got into my politics, my religion, anything like that. But when I got involved in NAMBLA, this was a completely different mindset. I had to think like them. I had to talk like them, because it was different from what I had ever experienced. And I did a lot of research on the internet into the psychology of these people. I got involved in some of their chat rooms, and would just see how they talked and walked and acted. And they just saw the world through a different set of eyes. An example, and again, I'm not sure with your audience, but over here in we have a thing called Sylvan. It's a learning, it's tutoring for your kids. And there was a commercial on Sylvan, and one of the guys had actually videotaped the commercial and just kept watching it over and over again because he was in love with the little boy on the commercial. Now, you and I may have watched it and thought, oh, that's a good idea because my son or my granddaughter needs tutoring, so I'll contact the company. But no, this guy, he was looking at that. I mean, they just saw the world differently. And the entire time I was doing this investigation, I was always afraid I was going to say the wrong thing that didn't sound, didn't come from their perspective. They didn't have the same political views I did. They didn't have the same religious views I did. And so it was one of these that I sort of had to be more cautious with that one than I did any of the other assignments that I did.
I mean, did they have religious beliefs?
Well, yeah. We had one of the guys we convicted was an ordained minister. He had actually given me 125 images of child pornography and 8 videos of men having sex with boys. So, yeah, it was different. They viewed it, some of them, and it was interesting because they viewed, some believed that they were actually boy lovers, that they were sexually attracted. This was their sexual orientation, that this is the way they were born. Others just viewed themselves as kind of perverts and just sort of the slam bam, thank you, ma'am, I want sex with little boys. Others, it was, I want the loving relationship. I want to develop this. And you saw some members that paid for it and just did it. Others that would go through what we called grooming, and they might spend months just kind of grooming the child, taking them on camping trips, taking them to events before they actually even approach them about sex. Because in this particular organization, we were looking at persuasion predators, not the kind of guy that breaks into your house in the night and snatches your kid out of the bedroom. These were men that were trying to develop a relationship and then exploit that relationship.
It sounds very similar,
Chris,
Bob.
But Chris, just in answer to you, I mean, my first real meeting, my first face-to-face meeting, there were about 35 of these guys, and I had called my son and I said, where's the Palestinian? Just give me a grenade and let me just go in there and pull the pin on the grenade, and I'll do more for society if I kill all of us. That's the way I felt. That
would be the hard part is not wanting to attack them. One thing that I was going to ask Bob is outside the fact that they are attracted to, or they were attracted to young boys, were they fairly normal functioning members of society, or a little bit odd otherwise?
You know what? And that's a fascinating question, because when I went into this, it's kind of a longer backstory, but when I had my first face-to-face meeting with these guys, I assumed that they were all going to look like Central Casting Send Me a Pervert. I mean, I assumed that this was going to be the trench coats and the horn-rimmed glasses, and they hung out at a public park and just threw open their coat and exposed themselves to everybody. And when I got to this first meeting, yes, some of them did look like they, were kind of perverts, but there were a lot of normal people. I mean, I know some of this is video. I'm about a 2.5 on a scale of 10 when it comes to, but I don't think I look like a pervert. And once I kind of got with the group and began to look at them, it was like, holy crap. I mean, these guys look as normal as I do. I mean, yeah, there were some fat roly-poly guys, and there were some really athletic guys. We ended up convicting 8 members of the group's inner circle. One of them was a personal trainer and was built, he could have been a cover boy on a muscle and fitness magazine. But some were the fat roly-poly kid. So it was actually hard to have a checklist of this is what you look for.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about the grooming process, Bob, and sort of taking them on camping trips, because that was very similar to what I'd read, that I'm sure you'll be aware of. But the case with Jerry Sandusky up at Penn State, where he was the
Right.
assistant coach and defensive coordinator for many years at Penn State, and just more so for Chris because he doesn't follow American football. Penn State's a massive football program in America, Chris, and he basically had open access to young preteen boys because he was a famous football coach, and they used to go to his football camps. He would let them stay over. He would take showers with them, and no one really batted an eyelid because he was in a position of power. So was there people within the group that had that? You said obviously the ordained minister would have a certain amount of power within a society or within a group. Was that a kind of theme through the inner circle of NAMBLA?
Yeah. Again, with the men I was dealing with, most of them were high functioning individuals in society. And of course, it's the whole idea of why do you rob banks? Well, that's because where the money is. And it's similar to these men would somehow be involved in somewhere where there were children. We convicted 3 special ed teachers. We had one was a child psychologist. We had a dentist, a Boy Scout leader, a big brother. They gravitated toward where they had access to children. So it kind of wasn't that loner who just stayed hunched down in his mother's back bedroom in the basement or something. I mean, these were people that were out there. We had a PhD psychologist. Like I said, we had a dentist. We had teachers that were educated, but we had some blue collar people too. And as part of the investigation, I corresponded with about 165 members that were in prison. And I dealt with everything from Mensa members to the illiterate. It just ran the whole socioeconomic gamut.
As now, with all these people, that you were dealing with, and the gang that you had, or the group that you had infiltrated, Bob, was there one sort of common theme? Was there something that linked everybody together? They're all very different, but was there one thing that was similarly,
Well, obviously, what linked them together was their love of boys. But we had some that were married, some that were openly gay, some that were heterosexual but liked little boys. I mean, there wasn't a checklist.
No, it's just because, but when you mentioned some of them were talking about being loners in their mum's basement or something like that, that's the kind of the thing that I was thinking about, is kind of strange people who I think we all knew kids when we were growing up that were a bit odd at school. The guys who would, you found out they like to throw mice on the road, or they set fire to bins. Just things you were like, that's a little bit strange. But I just wondered if there was one kind of common theme where they all kind of losers, but it doesn't seem like there is. It seems like everybody was completely different. Like there's nothing that you go, oh, this guy does this, so we must watch him.
I'm sure it's the same thing over in Scotland, that when the news comes out and everybody thinks, oh yeah, now that I look back, I can see where this was a guy who did this. He lived at home with his mother. He was single. He was a school teacher. He never dated. He was out of shape. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But again, that's not what we found at all.
Yeah, that would be the more difficult side of your work, would be that side. But which one was the most, I say, cautiously, which side, which assignment would have been the most fun, or the one that you enjoyed the most?
But I may have misunderstood the question, but that was kind of one of the problems. And before we began this, we talked a little bit. You were mentioning about the psychology of everything, and what's really important for an undercover agent is that you have to see the gray. I mean, and I think this is true from any law enforcement perspective. Most of us in law enforcement see black and white. Either you committed the crime or you didn't commit the crime, and those that commit the crime go to jail. And if you commit the crime, now you go to jail, that type of attitude. And as soon as you see the crime being committed, then we arrest them and send them off. But when you're undercover, you're amongst these people that are committing crimes, but you need to see the gray. You can't look at them as a criminal. You have to look at them as a human being. And you have to latch on to some decent quality and keep thinking of that while you sublimate this desire to just want to kill them. And one of the guys that I worked with was a PhD psychologist, was funny. I mean, he had me in stitches most of the time. And what was bothersome for me was I didn't want the jury, if this were going to go to trial, I didn't want the jury to sit there and think, oh my gosh, this undercover agent, he just thinks this is so fun, and he's laughing all the time, and he must just be one of them because he's enjoying this. So that's kind of some that you have to keep in mind when you're working these type of investigations. And I always like to say that I try to think of my grandmother on the jury. I don't want the jury to think I'm just as bad as the bad guys. I want them to I want them to see the dichotomy, but by the same time, I want the bad guys to accept me as one of them.
How does that work, Bob? Because I know, again, you talked, about the TV image of the JAG lawyer, and obviously we have the TV image of an undercover agent, where you're approached by a gang, and the only way you can join the gang is by committing a crime, for example, whether it's shooting someone to become a made guy, like in Goodfellas, or whatever it might be. How do you approach that side of the undercover work, where you're maybe going to have to go in and infiltrate? Because when I looked up the notes on, you throw out names like La Cosa Nostra, the Russian mafia, some of the crime gangs in LA and the drug gangs. How do you go about sort of getting access to that without stepping over the lines that you obviously have to stay inside as a law enforcement agent?
No, that's you've hit it, Ali. I mean, that's kind of the hard part, because you can't step over that line. And I was never in that position. You had the Goodfellas, and you talk about the Goodfellas case, but like Joe Pistone, who played Donnie Brasco. I mean, he was right there, a mob member. He was an Italian FBI agent, and he posed as a mob guy. And you just have to avoid, you just can't kill someone to maintain your credibility. Jay Dobbins was infiltrated the Hells Angels, and there were things that he could do and he couldn't do, but you just can't do it as a law enforcement officer. So you have to watch that, and that's part of what makes it difficult is knowing how close you can get to that line without crossing it. And you have to know in advance how far you can go, and kind of in your mind have this idea that, okay, if they ask me to do this, what's my response? If they want me to do that, how do I respond to it? So that it's almost like you've already rehearsed this scene and it just comes to you naturally without sitting there trying to talk about it. I never posed as a drug user. I was a drug dealer. And so I didn't have to sit there and do the line with the bad guys because, hey, I'm here to sell. I'm here to make money. I'm not here to do drugs with you. You know, most bad guys don't want to be friends with you. If they think they're going to make money off of you, that's what they want to do. And they're not looking to make friends. They're looking to make money. So that was the one thing that I saw that kind of differs from what you necessarily see in Hollywood. In any of my undercover operations, I had some service that they wanted, and whether it was the money to buy the drugs, whether it was a warehouse where they can store their stolen goods, so I had something that they wanted that didn't necessarily rely on a 24/7 friendship that we're just going to go bar hopping and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, what would be the cover? When you were not with, whatever assignment you were on, Bob. What would be the cover for your, normal life? How do you go about that? How do you, when you go home at night to the wife, what was the cover for all this stuff?
Chris, it just depended. In one case, I posed as a screenwriter, and I had access to a studio, and I had a friend who worked at the studio, and he'd just leave me passes at the front gate. I'd have the mob guys meet me in the cafeteria there on the studio. So it was kind of fun because they never wanted to come to my house. They wanted to meet me for lunch at the studio, and we'd sit there, and the stars, people they'd recognize, would walk by. And it was kind of funny because I always like to tell this story that the actors, they didn't want to admit they didn't know who you were. So somebody would walk by and say, "Hey, Chris and Allie, how you doing, buddy? Great job last night on TV. Oh, thank you. Thanks for back at you, buddy." Because they would never, when you were on the lot like that, it was never one of these, I don't know who you are, I'm not going to talk to you. It wasn't like encountering them on the street. So I kind of had some fun times with that. But a lot of times, Chris, for me, it was just quick hits. I worked gangs in South Central Los Angeles. I was white, working black street gangs. But I had an old beat up pickup truck, and I was buying drugs, and I would get in and get out. Hey, I'm here to buy the drugs. Here's the money. They'd give me the drugs, and I said, I got to rush back to my people. And then they weren't interested in pulling you in and let's sit down and smoke some crack cocaine and have a couple beers and all that. They weren't looking for that.
How is because when I hear South Central LA, I think of Boys in the Hood and all this kind of stuff. So what is the reality of those kind of areas? Is it like that?
One of the funniest lines to come out of any of my undercover arrests. We had arrested 13 gang members, all part of this drug buy program, and the one was the head of the Backstreet Crips, which was I guess a subdivision of the overall Crips. And he'd sold me drugs on 5 different occasions. And finally, when we had him arrested, and he's sitting down there on the bench with his head down and his hands behind his cuff behind him. And I said, you had to suspect a white guy coming down here to buy drugs. And he shook his head and he goes, man, I talked so with my boys, and we figured the police would be too stupid to send a white guy down here. So sometimes it was just a matter of, I kind of joke that you wouldn't have me play me in the movie because you wouldn't believe a white guy buying drugs in the middle of gang territory if you were watching on TV. I infiltrated a couple Asian gangs, not to be a gang member, but I was a white guy that had what they needed. And you would have gotten Jackie Chan to play that role. You wouldn't have gotten Bruce Willis to play that role. So,
but is that? I mean, do when you're applying, do they look for people who don't stand out? People who can blend into a crowd really easily. Is that something that they look for?
I say that God made me pure vanilla. I mean, there's nothing. I have a face that nobody remembers, and everybody thinks I kind of look like somebody, but they can't quite place who it is. And so it was just, you're not, I'm trying to think, well, I guess Tom Cruise or something, you're not Tom Cruise. You're going to remember Tom Cruise if he comes in and buy drugs, or he just doesn't look, I just look kind of normal and, nothing.
Yeah, you're just average white man.
Yeah, exactly.
in the best way possible, of course. Average white man.
White privilege.
Yeah. That's
that makes sense. It's funny because I had not that I'm not an average white man by any stretch, but not that you can tell at the minute, but my hair is very ginger, especially when it grows out. And I played rugby growing up, and I had long ginger hair at the time, like shoulder length, proper. Like rock star, well, not rock star, but rock and roll, heavy metal style, long hair. And when I played rugby, my coach always said, you're going to have to be the cleanest player on the pitch because the referee will 100% remember you. Do you know, there's no hiding places when you're 6'3" with long ginger hair. Everyone goes, oh, that's you. And the referee will remember you. If you're caught up in any kind of incident, the referee's going to remember it was you. And even if you're pulling someone out of that fight, they're still going to remember you were there at the point of the fight. And the next time anything kicks off and you're in the vicinity, you're the one that's getting ejected from the game.
Exactly. Well, and I mean, it's almost the same. The best disguise for a bank robber is a Band-Aid across his nose, because that's all the bank teller focuses on. I don't remember what he looked like, but he had a Band-Aid across his nose, and then when the guy leaves the bank, he rips the Band-Aid off. They never do find it. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, that does make sense. That little little bandage, and you focus on it.
Does make sense. Yeah, sounds so silly. And you would, if somebody asked me to go rob a bank and said, "Here, stick this in your nose," I'd be like, no, but why would I want to wear a mask? But that would make sense. It makes sense. It's so obvious.
I did a couple. I would put like a scar down my face, and I know that that's all they focused on was the scar. And there was one that I had a swastika tattoo on my neck for a couple days on an assignment. And I know they just focused on that swastika tattoo. They couldn't have identified my face, but they would just say, yeah, he had a swastika on his neck. So, little things like that are probably more important than the fake mustache and the eyeglasses and the wig and all that.
Now, I have to ask, Bob, what was the swastika for? What was that?
You know what? It was actually a pornography case. We had identified a guy that had child pornography, and I was going in as a heating and air conditioning repairman, and just knocked on the door and had the big swastika and had the work belt, went in and was able to deal with him for a little bit. And then
Yes, because I would, you say you're a swastika, I would instantly say, it's something to do with a white supremacy group or something like
Yeah.
that. So the
Yeah.
whole point of the swastika would be so that they would go, yeah, guy, that's because it's so noticeable that that's what they're focusing on rather than what you were up to. They just go, this guy's got, is that the whole idea? They just to focus on that one thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing with a magician. You watch this hand over here. When it's this hand over here that's doing everything. So you kind of get them. You kind of get
Yes.
them focused on that.
Make-
My last 3 undercover assignments, and I was working 3 cases at the same time, but I had a cane. I had a crutch, and that's people just knew that I was this handicapped guy. I couldn't be a cop because I had this really bad medical condition. So they kind of focused on the cane rather than,
Yeah.
because
so much sense.
I'm a little different now, but I always kind of thought I looked like a cop. I smelled like a cop, it was like, but it's like, yeah, you can't be a cop if you got a cane and you got a bad leg. So
Yeah.
in the NAMBLA case, that's what I used a cane. I had an arm crutch, and it was that was sort of offsetting it. They just figured, oh,
I'm now
he
going to
can't be
look.
a cop. He may be an informant, but he's not a cop because he's got this medical condition.
I'm now going to look at the world in a completely different way now.
I know it's kind of blown my mind a little bit, that whole idea of the flourish and the look over here, while the other hand's the one that you should have been looking at.
Yeah, it makes me
Massively
think about
fascinating.
a lot of things. But yeah, so I think like most guys sort of mine and Ali's age, the mob stuff would be super interesting. Was that I mean, I would imagine with something like the mafia, it would have to be a long-term thing. But were you short-term? Were you in and out, or
That was a 9-month investigation. And again, I'm white Anglo-Saxon, and my ancestors are from Scotland, so I'm not going to go in as an Italian. That story, we set it up. We had an informant, a guy that we had wrapped up. We had arrested him for extortion, and he agreed to introduce an undercover agent. And essentially, I was a screenwriter. I was selling drugs, but in order to sell drugs, I needed to have protection. So you pay a street tax to the mafia, and then by you paying the street tax, now you're protected, and no one's going to bother you. So that's how we originally began. I was selling drugs in Hollywood and needed protection, started paying a street tax, and then came back at him with, hey, my guy got bumped off. I don't have a source of cocaine, and without the source, I can't pay the street tax. Do you have somebody that I can buy drugs from? Well, they introduced me to a mob guy that was selling cocaine. So we were able to make numerous fairly large amounts of drug purchases, so that they were making money off me buying the drugs from them at a profit, and then they were still charging me the street tax. So that was how that particular case went down, and it just kept going and going and expanding beyond anything that we really wanted. We ended up taking out 15 mob guys in that particular investigation.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But I loved, Chris, to answer your question, really, I loved the mob guys. I mean, they were the most fascinating people, and they told stories, and it was just fun times. And again, I know you said about half your audience is in the United States, and probably because you watch movies, you would know this anyway, but to be in the mob, you have to make your bones, and usually you have to kill somebody in order to be invited into the Cosa Nostra. And there was one guy that I was dealing with, and we knew he was a made guy, and he was much older. I mean, he was probably in his late 60s, early 70s, and I was in my early 30s, and one day I just asked him. I said, Mike, you're a made guy, and he kind of shook his head. And I said, so you had to kill somebody? Who'd you kill? And he looked at me, and he had a real guttural voice. He goes, is there a statute of limitations on murder? And I said, I said, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't think so. And he goes, next question.
That's brilliant.
So he wasn't going to answer, but I'll tell you a funny story about that. And I know both of you are martial artists, but I boxed, and I wasn't very good with my feet, but I was okay with my hands. And so I enjoyed boxing, and I used to watch it on ESPN. And this guy was, older and didn't quite understand cable television. This was back in the 80s, and didn't quite understand cable television. And he had been a professional boxer in his early years. And I was watching ESPN and enjoying the fights, and I go meet this guy in a motel room, and he's got the ESPN on, and it's the same fights that I saw the night before. And he looks at me and he goes, "Yeah, no, this kid's a pretty good fighter. He's good." I said, "Mike, look at the back of his neck. It's all red. It's tensed up. He's going to lose it. I bet he doesn't even make it through the next round." Well, I knew he'd been knocked out in the next round. So 3 minutes later, the guy's on the mat, and this guy thinks I am just, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, because I have predicted this knockout, and I was able to spot things in this boxer that obviously no one else saw.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm a big boxing fan as well. Did a little bit of amateur boxing, so I'm a big boxing fan as well. But yeah, so yeah, well, I'm not sure why. I don't know why. The mob seems, to us, like, watching films and stuff, cool. Because we think of John Gotti and all these kind of real slick mobsters. I don't know why, because I don't think it's still is it still a thing? Is Italian mafia really still a thing in America? Is it still going?
Yeah, it's pretty weak now.
Yeah.
Most of the big people have been taken out. I mean, I think the FBI and the Department of Justice and other federal agencies deserve a huge pat on the back for how they've been able to really go after the mob and take care of them. I mean, now in the United States, probably the bigger problem is some of the Russian organized crime, or MS-13, these other groups that have risen to the top in terms of sheer danger. And in some respects, it's kind of what's wrong. The old mob, the Italian mafia, they had a sense of honor, and this is how things run and rule. I don't know if you know the name Debbie Reynolds, but she was an actress and owned a casino
Carrie
in
Fisher's
Las
mom.
Vegas. I'm sorry, what?
Sorry, Carrie Fisher's mum.
Okay, yes. And I saw her interviewed one day, and she was talking about when the mob ran Las Vegas, and she said, the thing was, nobody got killed that wasn't supposed to, and it was kind of true that the mafia, the modern mob, didn't do drive-by shootings like the gang members did. They didn't blow up casinos or restaurants like the terrorists do. It was, we're going to target this one guy and we're going to kill him, and he deserved to be killed by their standards because of what he did. So.
That's
similar.
similar to what we had over here, wasn't it, Chris? We had in Glasgow, there was quite a relatively strong gangland scene with the Thompson Clan, who
Arthur
was
Thompson,
known as Arthur Thompson. He was known as the Godfather of Scotland, and it was very much the same. they didn't attack women, they didn't attack children. It wasn't indiscriminate violence. It was violence against other criminal families that were moving in on their turf. And they had a lot of problems, just with you talking about terrorism, Bob, when the IRA and the Irish moved into Glasgow, because the IRA were bombing pubs that British people like servicemen, women, police officers drank in. But a lot of those pubs paid protection money to the Thompson gangland enforcers. And then you had a bit of trouble between the IRA terrorists and the gangland, what would have been seen as the mob in Scotland. And they had that same ethos where, we're not going to come after you, but if you cross us, then we're going to put you in the ground. And as you say, it's changed so much over the last years that the big crime bosses are long dead now, and it's fractured into hundreds of little gangs of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I use the term men loosely, that just fight and cause trouble everywhere. So is that kind of going a similar line then with the Italian mafia in America?
I think so, yeah. And there was a sense of honor with the Italians. You never went after a family, you went after the guy. Well, now the family is fair game for most of these groups.
Yeah. It's a sad state of affairs when you're looking at your modern life and you wish you still had the Italian mafia. I really miss having those Italian mafia guys.
Well, we had that one situation when I was working gangs, and we literally wiped out a street gang. I mean, we set up a drug program and we arrested the top leaders. And then the next week, another gang came in and took over the neighborhood. So it was kind of like, well, who do you want to run the neighborhood? You want this gang or that gang? But we thought we were doing the right thing by taking out this gang. And the next thing we know is someone else had moved in and taken over the neighborhood. So.
This is essentially what what we did in Iraq, right? Let's get rid of Saddam Hussein, and then all of a sudden we go, shit, what have we done? You know what I mean? Like, we should have just kept that guy there and not created all this mess. But that's the mistakes that human beings. What's amazing is when you see these things, even just speaking to yourself, when we spoke to Robin Drake before, you're speaking to somebody who was infiltrating, major organizations, whether it was, criminal or, pedophile gangs or whatever it was. And you speak to a guy like yourself and you go, Bob's just a guy. And you look at these, when you look at, right now with, the coronavirus and all this stuff, and you see people making, governments all around the world, I know our government doing things, and they make these decisions and you think, why have you done that? And then it's not until you realize that they're just people. They're not, because you have these ideas of, somebody in the FBI, there must be something different to me because they're in the FBI. And then you speak to you and you go, Bob's just Bob, he's a cool guy. And, so we have these weird perceptions of, whether it's a president or the prime minister over here, or, we have these weird perceptions of people. And then you speak to them and you go, oh, okay, this is just a person. I don't know where I'm going with this little rant I'm on, but it's interesting to speak to yourself, and then when you speak to as you're talking about the maid guy, having a little joke about, clearly he killed somebody but he's making a joke about it, and it's because you have these ideas of a maid guy being very serious, and you think of Godfather and the film, sitting in his chair and it's kind of dark, and it's interesting to hear that even at that level, they're still just people.
Well, I think from a mob standpoint, that's what the Sopranos showed. In the Sopranos, they had the problem. The guy had to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I mean, he had family problems. He couldn't control his kids, and we all have the same problems. It's just we either go about the solutions differently, or our 9-to-5 job is different, but we still have a family to take care of and children to raise and all of that. So,
yeah, I mean, talking,
but Chrissy, kind of get back. I'm going to change the subject a little bit, but
okay.
I just enjoyed screwing with people. and that's what made working undercover fun. And
Yeah.
this is some of my Scottish roots, but I had 3 undercover names, so I always kept Bob because I didn't want you to see me on the street and say, "Oh, hey Chuck, how are you doing?" And the bad guy says, "Oh, I thought you said your name was Bob," so I always kept Bob. My first undercover name was Bob Bourne, and it was after the Bourne Identity when the books came out. Well, then my second undercover name was Robert William Wallace from Braveheart, and in the NAMBLA case, at one point they'd asked me my name because I went by Robert, and I said Robert Wallace, and it was Robert W. Wallace, and they said, "Well, what's the W?" And I said, "William." "You mean like Braveheart?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "You know, in the end of the movie when they cut up all his body parts," I said, "my family got the penis." And they just thought, they just started laughing. I thought that was so great. And then my third undercover name was Robert David Webb, which David Webb was Jason Bourne's real name in the Bourne Identity. So it was always something there. And I love to play music. I would have music playing in the car. The bad guys never figured it out, but I would have Jailhouse Rock playing, Folsom Prison Blues. I mean, if it is a prison theme, it's playing in my car when the bad guys are there. And I ended up doing a huge weapons deal. It was really a $60 million shoulder fire missile deal. And when the bad guy, there were 6 or 7 times when the bad guy got into my car. There's a country western singer. He just died this past year, Charlie Daniels, and he's if you know, he did The Devil Went Down to Georgia, was his most famous song. But he had a song called Uneasy Rider, and it's about this long-haired hippie that goes into a redneck bar, and he gets confronted because he's a hippie, and he makes up this story. So I had the song cued to this line. So there were 6 or 7 times when the bad guy got into my car, and when I turned the ignition on, the first line you hear on every tape is this, and it goes, "Don't you know it? This man's a spy. He's an undercover agent for the FBI." And that was from the song. And they never caught on, and it was just.
Do you think that was just too obvious? Like,
well, again, and I think part of it for me, and I think you'll find this with a lot of guys that particularly work undercover. That first time you go undercover, I mean, it is such an adrenaline rush, and it's like the drug addict that keeps trying to get that initial hit, that first heroin hit, and now they're chasing the dragon to get that hit. And for me, it was sort of trying to chase that adrenaline dragon. So I would just see how far I could push it, and then, when I got right to the edge and maybe it's a little too dangerous, back off a little bit, but just to see how far I could go and do that. There was a part of a language barrier, but I was dealing with some Chinese, and I had my recording device in this day planner, and I would just call it my recorder. And I was handicapped. I had the crutch, and I just tell the guy, I'd put this day planner on the table, and that's a recording device right there on the table as we're talking. And then I'd get up and I'd say, "Hey, John, don't forget to bring my recorder." He goes, "Oh, okay, I'll bring your recorder." And so he's actually carrying the recording device in his hand, and we're walking back to my car or whatever. But it was just, let's just see how far we can push it.
That's amazing.
Crazy.
That's amazing how at any point during our lives we could just be getting completely bullshitted, and it would seem obvious.
Yeah, it's like those bits at the end of the movies where they reveal the stage by stage, and you're like, "How have I not seen this all the way through the movie?" And you suddenly all the pieces fall into place.
Yeah,
that'd be. I like that one about the line from the song, though. That amused me greatly.
Yeah, that is amazing.
I like that. I do like that.
So,
One of the things you said sorry, one of the things you said right at the start, Bob, was you scored a 0 in the CIA personality test. But now, ironically, you've played about 8 or 9 different personalities since then. So do you think that was potentially something the FBI saw, that, you know, the whatever personality test the CIA gave didn't suit them, but actually you were perfectly suited to this role? Or did you decide that? How did that play out?
Okay, the personality test that the CIA gave, it was one, if you had a 0 personality, you could live on a deserted island for the rest of your life and be content. And a 10 had to be constantly surrounded by people. And I kind of skewed my answers because I just thought, you know, like SAS or something, they're going to drop me in behind enemy lines and I'll stay there for a couple months and then kill the third world dictator. And then they snatch me out with a helicopter. And what they were looking for was people that would just go to embassy parties and sidle up to the foreign dignitaries and convince them to cooperate and provide information to the United States. And it finally dawned on me that I have a 0 personality in the sense that I don't really need friends, but I'm not opposed to making friends. So it was easy for me in my undercover capacity to be nice to people, to talk to them, to interchange with them. And in many respects, it was good because I didn't develop a close personal relationship because I don't need friends. But in my undercover capacity, I could befriend you. But it wasn't anything that, oh, I'm feeling horrible that you're going to go to prison for what you're doing, anything like that, because I really didn't need you. I mean, I somewhat say that I'm a Judas. I mean, every person I ever befriended, I betrayed. And
was that ever hard? Was that ever difficult? Was there any point where you became close to somebody and had to, you know, give yourself a little reality check, say, oh, actually, this guy's going to jail for this, or, you know, he's buying, you know, weapons?
You know, Chris, I looked at it that I wasn't the judge and jury. I was just the investigator. And I'm not the person your actions have violated the law, and someone's going to determine how much time you should get as a result of that. I'll go back to my very first undercover assignment. My wife was pregnant at the time with our second child, and the Bureau, in all its infinite wisdom, decided to transfer me in the middle of this case to another division. And we were trying to play out this case, which turned out to be a very real good case. But the bad guy that I was dealing with, he was a mob associate and was one of the top art thieves in the United States, ended up, we were sitting in the car one day and I knew I was being transferred. And I just, and he knew that I had a wife. He knew I was married. He knew my wife was pregnant. And I made up this story, but I just said, hey, my wife's pregnant. Yeah. And she's got this medical condition. I'm not sure what it is. It's something like inverted placentae. And she's having trouble. She may not be able to keep the baby. And there's a doctor back in Indianapolis. And so we're going to drive back to Indianapolis, and she's going to be treated by this doctor. Now, this is all a lie. You know, all the medical stuff is a lie, other than my wife's pregnant. And so we're sitting in this car, and I'm talking about this, and I'm kind of getting teary-eyed, talking about my wife and saving the baby and all this. And he leans over and he pats me on my thigh, and he goes, "Have you ever thought of prayer?" And it's like, holy crap! I mean, this guy is a righteous drug dealer, art thief, ex-con, and he wants to talk about prayer. He said, there's a religion called Christian Science, and you can call them up on the phone, and they can they'll pray for you over the phone, and they can heal you. And he paused and he says, I'm seriously thinking of taking up this religion after I give up stealing. And it was like, wow. What? But I say, to kind of answer your question, Chris, nobody in the FBI ever expressed any concern for my wife. This guy really was concerned for my wife, and part of that was because I was buying his stolen art and all that, but still there was that concern. But I had to keep in mind that the guy's going to end up going to prison for what he did, and he did end up going to prison. But
that's so interesting. Do you think that was because, like, underneath the actual being an international criminal, he was actually a nice person, or do you think it was purely because he wanted to get on your, keep on your good side?
No, I think there's good in all of us, and we're all flawed individuals, and some of it we don't act out in a criminal capacity.
Yeah.
But we used to joke in the FBI that, other than a serial killer, he's really a pretty nice guy. And it was kind of true. Everybody's got the good thing. And that, as an undercover agent, you've got to latch on to the good. If you see everybody as just 100% bad, a criminal, a bad guy is like a dog. A dog can smell your fear. He knows when you're afraid of him. And that's the same way, bad guys know if you hate them, or so you find that good feature, and that's what you latch on.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things is I've had the, I guess, displeasure of meeting, a few bad people, and it was all through, cars. A car garage that I used to work at, a lot of people used to come in and, they would race cars. This is a way that they would legitimize their money. They used to, street race and all this kind of stuff. And this is how they would sort of legitimize where the money was coming from. It was, spending dirty money on cheering up cars and go racing, and they would win money this way. But every one of them who were, people that you'd heard, like you'd read the name in the newspaper or heard on news, and you meet these people, they were all very charming. They were all, to me, they were all super nice, and it was like, is he actually a bad? It was a very bizarre thing, because I never met. Obviously, they were terrible people, but they were never not nice to me. I always found that extremely strange. To me, they were always hello, shake your hand, how are you? I always found that fascinating, really interesting, how that worked.
No, and I think that's true. I think it's so easy for us to just categorize. Okay, he's this, so he must be that. He's a drug dealer, so he must be a horrible parent, or whatever. And
yeah,
it's just not always true.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I want to go back to, Bob, is Scotland. What do you know where the ancestors were from, or have you looked into it?
We have a picture in our house of some relative that has I think it's called Little Sipelin, or something like, I don't know. It was a farm that he had, and it was a picture my mother had, and when she died, we have the picture, and now we have it in our Sipelin, I think, is what it's called. I don't know. You should have told me ahead of time. I would have researched it for the podcast.
It's always good.
Such a I guess a lot of Americans have their ancestry in Scotland. But yeah, have you been over? Have you came over?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, you should definitely visit. It's quite a nice place to come and it's not like Disneyland. We don't have roller coasters and all the cheese you can eat on a mobility scooter, but there's some nice things to see.
Well, what I would say is we have real castles. We don't have Imagineer castles. We've got real ones.
Yeah. I may take you up on that. I know my wife would like to come.
Yeah, definitely. If you end up here and you need a tour guide, me and Ali would be delighted to show you around a little bit. Should that happen. But But yeah, I think we've
we're kind of heading on to that hour mark that we planned in.
We-
Just before we do start winding it up, Bob, do you have any social media or any website that we can send our listeners to if they want to find out more about you?
Yeah, if you go to bobhamer.net, so that's BOBHAMER.net, and I've written a few books, and so go to those, buy those books. My wife will appreciate it, and so that's what I've. And the first book I wrote was called The Last Undercover, and it chronicles and details the NAMBLA investigation. So if somebody wants to learn more about that, but then I also throw in a dozen other cases in which I was the undercover agent. So it kind of gives you some insights into what it's like to work undercover in the FBI, and the good and the bad and everything.
Yeah, I think Ali will grab one of those. I believe Ali's the reader. I don't, and I'll wait for the documentary. Ali will read the book. I'll wait. I'll wait till Tom Cruise plays Bob Hamer, and then I'll watch. But yeah, it's been extreme. It's one of those ones where the first time, I had to glance. I don't know what time it is because I don't have any way to look. So I glanced at my watch, and it was approaching an hour. And I always feel like it's been a good conversation when an hour's went by, and you feel like, shit, we need to get Bob back on. It's been really interesting. So,
well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's been
super
genuinely interesting.
100%. We could quite easily do another couple of hours, but it's getting close to bedtime in Scotland here, so I'm up early to swim. Unfortunately, it's your bedtime. It's my nap time. So it's a good time to end it.
Works out well. Cool. Well, let's start winding it down. But Bob, genuinely, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. It has been genuinely very, very interesting. You've had some fantastic stories as well. You're clearly a natural storyteller that you picked up over your time, talking to all those mob guys potentially. But it's been good. So Bob Hamer, episode 66, thank you very much for your time this evening and this afternoon.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Bob.
The Silly Goose Gang Podcast.